Every year, visitors by the tens and hundreds of thousands go to see Old Faithful and all of the bubbling mud pots and geysers of Yellowstone National Park. But did you know Yellowstone National Park is the world's largest volcano? Gary Sturm is here to discuss with me what could happen in the near future.
In the August 2005 Prophecy in the News magazine, JR has written an article talking about a volcano. Yes, that's right. It's been Yellowstone has been added to the list of active volcanoes being observed as the sites of potential disasters. And by the way, JR, I think it's interesting that they now have electronic detectors watching the rising topography. They've discovered that the topography is literally rising by a measurable amount each year.
About an inch a year. The ground surface is rising about an inch a year. Has been for over 50 years now.
Now that's amazing.
Yes.
We're talking about hundreds of tons, millions of tons of earth being raised by this pressure. Well, something could give.
Well, in Yellowstone Lake, it's a high mountain lake where the water is supposed to be very cold. The water is now 88 degrees. Dead fish everywhere.
Wow.
And there are certain areas of the park that have been closed off to the public because the ground temperatures reach 200 degrees. And the animals in Yellowstone National Park are migrating out of the park. Now, according to scientists, they say the last time that Yellowstone blew, it left a hole in the ground the size of Los Angeles. And we have a picture of a new global positioning system sensor stations placed all around throughout the caldera area of Yellowstone National Park. We have a picture of it here in our August edition of our magazine, Prophecy in the News. We invite you to get it, to get a copy of it and look at it and read this article for yourself. It's absolutely astounding. The possibility that if this volcano blows, and they say it could go any minute, if it blows, every person within 600 miles of ground zero is likely to die. So says the scientists.
600 miles, JR, that puts it within 200 miles of where we're sitting in Oklahoma City.
Yes.
Of course, that would cover Denver, Colorado, down to Albuquerque, New Mexico, out west into Wyoming. We're talking a huge, huge area.
Yes, not only the explosion, but the ash and what have you that would be cast into the air. It would devastate our nation from coast to coast and border to border, killing millions upon millions of Americans. This is Yellowstone National Park, the park we love so much. And yet, Gary, in these last days, things like this are happening everywhere.
They are. JR, and by the way, as we begin to look at some of these events during this program, you'll see that we're sort of on a precipice right now. Many things are happening which in the past simply weren't noticed at all. 2,500 times the Mount St. Helens eruption is what we're talking about here. As JR has written in this article, 2,500 times the explosive force of Mount St. Helens is what we're talking about from Yellowstone National Park.
Yes.
This thing would devastate the United States.
According to the articles that I surveyed in order to write this article for our magazine, between 1973 and 1998, instruments recorded over 15,000 earthquakes directly under the park area. In 1965, a team led by Robert Christensen of the U.S. Geological Survey mapped the area and discovered that Yellowstone is an active and rather young volcano. They discovered that a huge plume of magma had risen from deep within the earth and bore through the continental plate. As the plate moved southwest, the hotspot left a series of ancient yellow stones. This, of course, is the history of it, across a 500-mile swath of southern Idaho from Oregon to Montana. And this is where it got its name, Yellowstone. But this volcano is on the move again, Gary.
Yeah, and JR, what we're talking about here is, excuse me, the movement of tectonic plates. Now, JR, this brings us to the general subject of plate tectonics, and usually When we speak of plate tectonics, that is the plates of the Earth's surface gradually slide across the underlying strata, and where they collide, they form earthquake zones. But more than that, they create weak spots in the surface, which can then allow gases and magma to bubble up, forming volcanoes. So when we're talking about plate tectonics and earthquakes, we're really also talking about volcanoes.
Yes. Now, we've known for many years that Old Faithful was some kind of a volcanic activity, and these various geysers and mud pots, you know, that bubble up.
Right.
But they're saying that this is a lot scarier than people assume. You know, people have been going there and visiting, but today, most of the visitors, we're told, that go to Yellowstone National Park only stay a few hours because they can't stand the smell of the sulfur. The stench is so bad now.
Yeah, and when you're talking sulfur, you're really talking magma, volcanic magma, yes, which is highly sulfuric.
Which they say is less than a third of a mile below the surface of the ground. That's not very far down, you know. Some of these oil wells around here, 5,000 feet deep, that's a mile deep.
Sure. Or
and that's
deeper.
A simple that's a simple oil well.
Right.
You know, so we're talking not very many feet deep here.
The volcanologists are watching this with a very wary eye. Now, JR, to link this to Scripture, we're talking about volcanism, we're talking about plate tectonics, we're talking about earthquakes. Well, our Lord had a little something to say about earthquakes in the last days, of course.
Yes, he said in Matthew chapter 24 that in the last days there would be earthquakes in diverse places or various places. And another thing he said just a few verses later, he said that as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. So Gary, what happened in the days of Noah?
In the days of Noah, of course, there was a global flood. And the Bible is very clear, JR, that it was a global flood. And in fact, in Genesis 7:20, there's this phrase, and the mountains were covered with water. Well, if mountains are covered, that water is deep.
Yes.
And it all started this way. The reading in Genesis 7:11, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. JR, the consensus among Bible scholars is that in the days of Adam, there was a different climatic situation occurring. What we experience today with the jet stream and storms and seasons and so forth was not the case in Adam's day. The earth was stable. It was covered apparently with a vapor canopy that was at a very high altitude. It was frozen. And the weather beneath was very, very stable. The winds were stable. Instead of there being thunderstorms, rainstorms, apparently the Bible describes a mist as coming up out of the earth that watered things every day. Until the flood of Noah, and get this, the fountains of the great deep were broken up and the windows of heaven were opened. Well, JR, if a volcano, which could be called a fountain of the deep,
yes,
blew up toward the stratosphere, it would break up that vapor canopy and melt all of that frozen firmament and cause an incredible deluge. And perhaps that we're talking about that very thing.
So the fountains of the deep blew and opened up the windows above.
Yes.
And the precipitation came down. And this is an amazing thing. Jesus said, as it was then, so shall it be. So this volcanic activity that is proliferating around the world today is definitely a sign of the times of the end.
And JR, the fact is that there have been giant volcanic eruptions in the past, centuries ago, that filled the air with so much debris that it literally changed the weather patterns, causing a great deal of precipitation, even as it did in Noah's day. Because precipitation is caused when dust particles are surrounded by moisture and they precipitate out of the air, and thus the weather patterns could change radically. And of course, the tribulation period, we know that to be the case.
So you see, folks, the volcanoes that are exploding are casting off today, including Mount St. Helens back in the 1980. And the other volcanoes, which we're going to get to and tell you about as we continue this program, are definitely a sign of the end times. It looks as if the Lord Jesus Christ is soon to come. Take the tsunami, for example. That killed 250,000 people down in the Indian Ocean. That was volcanic activity. We'll tell you about it when we come back in just a moment. The various earthquakes that have happened around the world in the last century, for example, and especially more recently, are caused by volcanic activity. They go hand in hand. Earthquakes and volcanism go hand in hand.
They do.
And this tsunami that occurred down in near Sumatra in the Indian Ocean back last Christmas, 2004, was created a rip in the earth that was hundreds of miles long. It was a humongous rip in the bottom of the ocean. And Gary, I understand there were some microphones that detected this.
Now, there is an international global network of hydrophones designed to pick up submarine activity, also nuclear test activity, and those hydrophones caught a 7-minute sound clip. This thing took 7 minutes, and it's described as a ripping sound, much like ripping fabric or tearing fabric. And there was a 100-foot vertical displacement along this rift, which created the actual tsunami. But the ripping and tearing went on for 7 full minutes. This is also in the area, as JR mentioned, of great volcanic activity. Of course, Southeast Asia has had volcanoes for centuries.
Yes. Now there is what is called a ring of fire around the Pacific Rim. And especially coming up the Pacific coast of South America, Chile, Peru, those areas, and the Andes Mountains, there are dozens of active volcanoes going on now. But Gary, not only did we have Mount St. Helens, and now this activity under Yellowstone National Park, but there is a news item about something near Santa Barbara that has taken place recently.
And by the way, this is fascinating, JR, because the first notice of this near Santa Barbara in Southern California, actually, if you know where Los Angeles, Ventura, Santa Barbara, you go about 15 miles north of there, and you come to a state park called the Dick Smith Wilderness Park. Well, in that park, on August 21st, 2004, a forest fire spontaneously erupted. They put it out, looked for the source, and they discovered a certain patch of ground, about 3 acres in extent, was very, very hot for no apparent reason. It was just a wilderness area. It had never been hot before. Originally, the park rangers and geologists, and by the way, this has taken place over the past year. Originally, the park rangers found a candy thermometer, and they stuffed it into a crack in the ground. They discovered that it went to the full extent of the thermometer, 400 degrees, and that's where it stopped.
Wow.
And that's hot. And by the way, there's a little smoke coming out of this rift in the ground there. Later they measured 11 feet deep, and they came up with a temperature of 584 degrees Fahrenheit, and they have, quote unquote, no explanation for what's going on. Now, what would cause temperatures that high?
Well, Gary, it has to be volcanic activity.
It just has to be.
But with all those multi-million-dollar homes down on the foot of the mountain around Santa Barbara and over around Ventura,
right?
You know, it's a little hard to come right out and tell everybody that a volcano's building because of the value of the homes and what it would do to the industry, what it would do to the economy there in California.
And JR,
but it's coming, isn't it?
Absolutely. And in this article, we have a picture. We'll try to get this up so that you can see it, showing a gas sample tube standing vertically, and you can see smoke coming up out of the ground. Well, as I've always heard, where there's smoke, there's fire, folks.
Cute. Well, listen, back in the 1940s, there was a little crack in the ground with some smoke coming out down in Mexico.
That's right.
And this is an incredible story, folks, because a volcano built out of flat ground twice, or more than twice the height of the Great Pyramid of Giza.
That's right. There are a number of active volcanoes in Mexico, but there's one called Paracutin, and it's near the little city of Paracutin in Mexico. And a farmer, as the story goes, was just raising corn in a flat cornfield. And this is back in 1943. And he was doing his farming, and he noticed a little crack in the ground and some smoke coming out, much in the same manner as they've observed there north of Santa Barbara in California. And he continued to farm his corn for a little while, and nobody thought much about it. And then suddenly there was an eruption, and now Paracutin is 1,100 feet and growing. 1,100 feet right out of the flat ground. So, and that's not the only active volcano. There's another one near Mexico City, JR, that's over 15,000 feet tall, that's blowing and smoking right now. It's called Popocatépetl, and that's mighty close to the population of 20 million people.
Now that's east
of Mexico City.
Just a few miles. Actually, it's close enough to be scary.
Oh, yes.
There's another active volcano just a little to the southwest of Mexico City.
That's correct.
And Mexico City itself sits in the caldera of an ancient volcano, right in the heart of an ancient volcano.
20 million people live in that region.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, let me tell you something. Jesus said that these things would happen in the last days. And it's entirely possible that this will be a viable part of God's judgment upon a wicked world in the coming tribulation period. Remember, Adam received a message from God. Adam received a message from God that the world would be destroyed twice, once by water and once by fire. And according to Flavius Josephus, first century Jewish historian, they built two monuments, one to depict the coming flood, and the other one to depict the coming fire. And they made one of brick and the other of stone. One of stone because if the flood washed away the one of brick, then the one of stone might remain. Now, we do not know what two monuments these were that Flavius Josephus is talking about, but it is interesting, Gary, that the root word for pyramid means fire.
That's right. Actually, pyr, P-Y-R, is a root word for fire. Comes down to us through the Greek. And M-I-D, everybody knows what that means. Middle, midst. So you put that together and you have the word fire in the middle. And it makes you wonder what those ancients were doing.
So they were, it looked like they were, making a prophecy of the volcanoes that would cover the earth and begin to spout off in the end time, because God is going to judge this world because of its wickedness. Now, please understand that if volcanoes go off because of wickedness and sin, okay, that's a divine act of retribution. Now, what is so important about this is the hurricanes that have come up recently. In fact, July is not supposed to be hurricane month, and Hurricane, what was it, Emily, hit our southern coasts, earliest in 200-year history, and it's just the first of many. They're just popping up all over the Atlantic and Caribbean. And it looks like God is judging America. I wonder why. Well, we must stay on the side of Israel, and it's possible that, according to the book Eye to Eye, when we start spouting off about Palestinian state and Israel's going to have to give up this or give up that. In fact, our president said recently that Israel would have to return to its 1949 borders.
And when we fail to be a blessing to Israel, JR, there's a very clear connection that the Lord will remove his blessing from us. And thus it is. In the Old Testament, the fountains of great deep could have been volcanoes causing rain, in the latter days, JR, that same activity, the volcanic activity, could cause great upheavals in the crust of the earth, changing the topography and blasting men with great heat, as is mentioned in the book of Revelation.
Indeed. Let me tell you, we're living in the last days. The signs of the times are all about us. And I behoove you to trust in Jesus Christ as your personal Savior. He alone can give you eternal life. And I'm convinced that these earthquakes and volcanoes are a sign of the times. We'll be back in just a moment.